The French horn isn't French. In fact, if you were to walk into a professional orchestra, you won't call it a French horn, you'll call it by its proper name, which is just the horn. It's an unfortunate aspect of society that pretty much any brass instrument gets called a horn. In fact, even some woodwind instruments I've heard call a horn. So we can't really also call it a horn because it's an ambiguous term in most musical circles. So it gets called the French horn, even though, as I said, the French horn isn't French. Where this all started was back a couple of hundred years ago. Horns never used to have any valves. It wasn't until the early 1800s that they started adding valves to these instruments. But different manufacturers had different valves and different styles that they wanted to use. In Austria, they had a preference for a thing called the Vienna valve, and so you would have Vienna horns that used Vienna valves. Those horns are still very popular in orchestras in Vienna. Vienna valves, Vienna horns, Vienna orchestras, they still use them to this day. In Germany, they had a preference for the rotary valve. So you would get German horns that utilized rotary valves. And these are the instruments that we most commonly use today, except we call them French horns. In France, however, they preferred a thing called a péronne valve, or what we know today as a piston valve. And so actual French horns looked like this. They have 3 piston valves. This is an actual French horn. So if the instrument that we know as a French horn is actually a German horn, why do we persist in calling it a French horn? Well, I'm not 100% sure of the answer, but if I had to guess, it would be this. There was one other country that had a preference for horns that had piston valves, and that was England, an English-speaking country. And as an English-speaking person, the guess would be that, 100, 150, whatever years ago, when they started having horns with valves, they just simply referred to every horn with a valve as being a French horn, because that's where the French style horns were the ones that they first became familiar with. And so when rotary instruments started becoming popular, they just called them French horns because that was the name that they were familiar with. That's just my guess. I don't know if that's true or not, but it would seem to make sense in my mind. So, I hope you've enjoyed this brief video about why the French horn isn't French.